Hello, I'm Judy Stiles. Thank you for joining us this week on Newsmakers. Well, things are quiet this time of year in Jefferson City, but they will be picking up soon as the state lawmakers go back to work for a veto session. And joining me today, Charlie Davis, Missouri State Representative, District 162. Thank you for being here today.
It's always a pleasure to be with you.
And people know that you work up until May and the session's over, but sometimes we forget that there's more work to do oftentimes.
Most of the people think that since we are a part-time legislature that after May we don't do anything, which I think is just the opposite. We spend the vast majority of the year taking care of constituent issues, trying to also formulate what our policy and what we're going to work on during the next year. So it's just as busy now as it is during regular session.
So we have what's called a veto session. This is a chance where I guess the governor decided what he didn't like. You get to go back now and have a second chance.
We do. The Missouri Constitution sets up our framework, and it says that the governor has the authority to veto anything that he has objection to. But it's up to the legislature that if we have enough votes that we have the opportunity to override his vetoes, and out of 163 members, we have to have 109 vote to override the veto. And there are a lot of these bills that we're going to talk about today that we do have enough votes to override the veto.
And of course, you're representing the House of Representatives. The Senate also will be coming back, so it's
Absolutely.
the whole legislative body.
It is, and the way that it works is if it's a Senate bill, it has to start in the Senate. So if it's a Senate bill, like the one dealing with guns, it's a Senate bill, so the Senate has to start it first. And if they don't get it out of the Senate, then it never comes to the House. And then in the inverse, if it's a House bill, then it has to start with us. So if we don't get it out, then the Senate never sees it.
And then both houses have to approve of that.
That's correct. Both houses have to approve it, and we have to have a veto proof in the Senate also. And then if we have enough in the House and the Senate, then it actually goes into law immediately.
I know in the past there's been a lot of, partisan, where you have Republicans overriding Democrats. How do you get people crossing the aisle as far as, these types of things?
Absolutely. We have a lot of issues are not partisan issues. If it's things dealing with life, if it's things dealing with guns, if it's things dealing with tax policy, we have a lot of members from the other side of the aisle, the Democrats, that will vote to override the governor's veto. It's a little bit harder. They have a tendency of sticking together more during veto session, even though they voted yes, possibly during regular session. Sometimes they vote no, just to band together and side with the governor. But most of the time, if it's a bill that we overrode before, or we had enough votes to do in the House,
send it to the governor in the first place.
Send it to the governor in the first place, then a lot of times we have enough to override it.
Great. So the session getting ready to start in September.
September 14th.
Limitations on how long and those types of things?
Well, there's no limitation. Usually it's one day. We will meet starting at 10 o'clock Wednesday, September 14th, 10 o'clock in the morning. And usually by that evening we're done. Sometimes this year, we have about 20 bills that we may attempt to override. So it might be a little bit longer than one day, but generally it's one day.
So you have been doing your homework this summer about these bills. You knew right away when the governor vetoed something that this might be coming back. How's that decision made?
Have I been doing my homework? Here's our homework. This is the vetoed bills, etc., the things that the governor had objection to. So since May, since he started vetoing the bills, we have been doing our due diligence to make sure that we understand the bills. But we voted already on them during regular session, so we really know what the bills contain. But sometimes the governor will have an objection that maybe that we didn't think about. So it's still up to us to do our due diligence to make sure that the legislation that we override the veto of is something that is good policy for our state.
Now, is there a procedure for deciding which of those 20 items actually come up for a vote in the veto session?
It is actually up to the bill sponsor. I have one of my bills was vetoed by the governor, so leadership came to me and asked me, Charlie, do you want to override the governor's veto? And I had the opportunity to say yes or no. If I say no, then the bill goes away. If I say yes, then it's going to be up to us over the next few weeks, actually the last month in the next few weeks, to make sure that we have enough votes to override it. And if we don't, then it'll be something that we'll address again next year.
So there's been a lot of communication throughout the summer among members of the House and what you're looking at and so forth. Well, let's talk about some of the key items that you think we're going to make the headlines as far as veto type discussion.
Yeah, I think that there are two of the biggest bills that we have talked about, and two of the things that we had the most discussion on during regular session and during the interim has been the gun bill, as well as the requirement to show a photo ID to vote. And the gun bill it's not as bad as some of the people that have objection to it. it's basically saying that if you have the right to carry open in the state of Missouri, which Missouri is an open carry state, that if you have the legal right to carry open, then if this bill were to go into effect, then you would legally have the right to carry concealed. And the reason behind that was, let's say you're out carrying open, which is your Missouri constitutional right to, and you have a rainstorm, you put a coat on to cover yourself, immediately you're breaking the law because you're concealing it. Well, none of us, the vast majority of us don't believe that the intent of the law is to have somebody incarcerated because they put a raincoat on and cover a concealed gun. So basically, it's a very simple piece of legislation that says if you can carry legally open, then you can legally carry concealed. The law-abiding citizens are the one that this affects and make sure that they have the opportunity to be protected. As we know, those that are not law-abiding citizens are not following the law anyway. And as a matter of fact, just over the past few weeks, we have seen some more than what we would like to see people killed at the hands of guns, but they have all been at the hands of people that legally can't carry anyway. So passing laws to restrict it does not help that, I don't believe, in any way, because the criminals are carrying anyway.
So if somebody has that record or some reason saying you shouldn't carry, it's not going to change things for them.
In a perfect society, somebody who is a convicted felon that does not have the ability to carry open or concealed wouldn't, but we're not a perfect society. Those individuals, they buy their guns on the black market, whether shipped up from Mexico or from some other place, or just illegally. And we want to make sure that the citizens, the law-abiding individuals, have the right to conceal or to carry open and to protect their families and themselves.
How close was the vote on getting this to the governor?
It was pretty close, but we have enough to override it as of right now. Unfortunately, we have some individuals that have decided that they're going to vote no on it because they feel some pressure from some of their constituents. We have one state rep that resigned his position to become a lobbyist. Unfortunately, he wanted to become a lobbyist immediately, so he resigned his position before August 28th, which the new ethics bill took place. So his vote's not there. So we'll see. We had enough during regular session. So I believe we have enough in the House, but it is a Senate bill, so we'll have to wait until the Senate does it before we'll even know if we're going to bring it up for a vote in the House.
So will both the House and the Senate be called to order simultaneously? You'll start working on your things and they'll start working on yours?
We are called simultaneously, and it'll be up to the Senate to start on their Senate bills and the House to start on our House bills.
Now, you mentioned voter ID, and some people might be saying, well, isn't there something coming up on the November ballot that people have been talking about?
There is. There's actually two things. One, we put it on the ballot. We voted this year to put it on the ballot that actually set up the constitutional framework. Because a few years ago, the Supreme Court ruled it unconstitutional because we had the voter ID provision in statute, but we did not set it up in the Constitution to authorize it. So what we did was we were putting on the ballot for the people to choose that it allows the voter ID to become law. And then what we're going to vote on and try to override the governor's veto on is actually setting up the framework, how we're going to pay for it. Because what we wanted to do is to make sure that if somebody could not afford to purchase some sort of identification, a state-issued identification, that the state was going to pay for it. And if you don't have your source documents, so like your birth certificate, then we would pay one time for you to get your birth certificate, etc. Because we did not want to hammer somebody who did not have the ability to afford identification, even though I think that is a false argument. The vast majority of the people have identification. I think the only people that we have found is the elderly that were maybe born in the 20s and 30s where you didn't have records. So there may be a few there that don't have identification, so we want to make sure that the state paid for that. But the vast majority of the other people, you have to have an ID to open up a bank account. You have to have a photo ID to cash a welfare check. You have to have an identification to go down to Blockbuster, Family Video, and rent a video. So when the claims that we were going to discriminate against people that did not have identification, I think that's a moot point. I don't think that that is going to be true. I believe that the vast majority of the people do have identification. And if they don't, we're going to pay for it through taxpayer dollars to make sure that we're not being a burden upon those individuals.
So the way the system would work, if you override it, then November the people will then decide, do we want to put this in the constitutional approach?
Correct. Yeah, the November, what's going to be on the ballot is going to be the constitutional framework, and then what we're going to override here in a couple weeks is going to be the statute framework that actually tells how we're going to set it up and do it.
And then those two will tie together for
Correct.
future.
And if we don't override the veto this year, then and the constitutional portion gets voted up in November,
Right.
then come next year we will just pass the same bill that we have now, and depending on who the governor is, it'll either be vetoed again or signed into law, and we'll have another opportunity.
Okay.
But we have to do the constitutional framework in November to start the process.
Your anticipation about this vote? It's something people have talked about.
It is bipartisan. It wasn't just all the Republicans voting yes on it. We had several Democrats and independents vote with us also. So I believe it is something that we will override. My constituents, whether they're Republican, Democrat, Independents, the vast majority of my constituents believe that it is a good thing to do. So it is a bipartisan piece of legislation because I believe we need to protect the integrity of our election system. I don't want anybody voting for me fraudulently, and I don't want anybody voting for anybody else fraudulently. So to protect that integrity, I think is important.
I mentioned your constituents, so have you been able to use time this summer just to get the feel for the people in your district? What are they saying on these issues?
Absolutely. These are the two biggest topics that we have discussed during the interim. And the vast majority, I would probably say 90% of the people are asking me to vote yes to override the veto of the gun bill, and about the same amount asking yes to override the voter ID. And in my district, we're about 75% Republican. So if 75% are Republican and we're getting 90% of the people saying we need to do it, then we're getting 50% of the others asking us that are not Republican. So it is definitely bipartisan.
Great. Well, I know within our viewership area, there are other things that are coming up for the veto, and we have a lot of people who have agricultural land, farmers, ranchers, and so forth. One of the items is dealing with animal liability.
Animal liability trespass. And the whole idea and the whole concept behind that is, let's say I'm a farmer and I have a field that I have 100 cows in the field, and somebody comes along and cuts my fence or runs their car into my fence, knocks it down, a cow gets out. Should the farmer be liable for that cow getting out if somebody caused something to happen? I don't think so. I believe that we need to protect farmers, and if the farmer was not liable, if the farmer was not at fault, then why should he be sued because of that? Now, let's say he's got a fence that's deteriorated and he should have had a more modern fence or a better fence, then that does not exempt him from liability. What it does is exempt somebody if it's not their fault. And when we look at things like that, it's almost like my property, my house. If somebody were to step on my property without my permission and get hurt, is it really the landowner's responsibility to pay the medical bills or defend himself in court if that person was not authorized to be on the property? Same thing here. If the farmer is not at fault, then why should he be required to pay for it or be sued because of that?
Right. I know your district you have probably more urban area than rural, but you still have people throughout this area, this region.
Absolutely.
That have rural
The
concerns.
senatorial district covers Newton, Jasper, and Dade counties, and that's Senator Richard's seat. And we do have a lot of farmland, especially when you get north of Joplin. All the way through Dade County, it's all farmland.
north,
We have
right.
a lot of corn farmers, a lot of soybean, a lot of wheat farmers, and we have a lot of cattle farms too. Missouri's number 2 as far as cattle farms in this country. So obviously we have a lot of cows in this state, and I think it's something that we need to do. Especially when you look at the numbers, we're going to have to double our food supply over the next 30 years. Within one generation, we're going to have to double the supply. So we're going to have more farmland, be more productive, and make sure that we allow our farmers to farm their animal agriculture as well as their agricultural products in a way that allows them to be profitable and then provides us with a good product.
Now, you also have an item that deals with disasters in farmers, so then you have that.
Absolutely, and this is going to be the toughest one because the fiscal note on this is a little bit high compared to the other ones, and the Department of Revenue, I believe, or OA, determined that the fiscal note, or the amount of money that it could cost the state, is anywhere between $15 and $35-40 million. So that's going to be a little bit tougher to override the veto on. But the basic thing is to make sure that if a farmer has a a disaster. Maybe we have a tornado that goes through somebody's farm, or we have a flood. We had a lot of flooding during right after the Joplin tornado 5 years ago. A lot of land along the Mississippi and the Missouri River, the Mississippi River in southeast Missouri and the Missouri River in northwest Missouri. We had a lot of farmlands destroyed by flood, and this is supposed to help those farmers out in their disaster recovery to help them. If they have to spend a certain amount of money in recovering their land, then they could take some of that off and get some tax credits through taxpayer funding to help them recover. The problem with that is the large fiscal note, and some people are starting to get weak-kneed because if we pass that, then we're going to have to pull $35 million possibly from something else, or maybe we won't have another natural disaster of that magnitude, and it's really not going to cost hardly anything at all.
Well, you mentioned the fiscal side of things, and kind of going back now to the session, I know that there's been talk about Missouri and kind of the fiscal side. When you look around the states around us, Missouri kind of standing out among the others is doing better. You know,
absolutely, and that's one of the things I'm proud of the state of Missouri. When you look at other states, especially to our west and to our east, Illinois, Kansas, and Oklahoma, Missouri, we have a balanced budget requirement. So when we formulate our budget, when it is signed into law, has to be balanced. Now, that doesn't mean that it stays in balance for the rest of the year. That's going to be up to the governor to make sure that it's balanced on a daily basis. But we don't go in debt like other states have done. And even when we look at the tax cut that starts January 1 of next year, that tax cut for all Missouri citizens and businesses starts to get implemented. We made sure that the state would receive a minimum of a $100 million increase in revenue before that tax cut kicked in, because we didn't want to do what some other states did, where they did a huge tax cut. The next, you know, they don't have enough money for education. We don't have enough money for other things in the state that we should really be taking care of. I think Kansas is one of the states that they're seeing a huge decrease in the amount of revenue going into higher education, and they've had to have a lot of teachers laid off, a lot of closing of classes. But we didn't see that. We're not seeing that because we are quite a bit more physically responsible. Even though Missouri, it ranks 47 as far as the economic drivers of our state compared to other states, we are at least balanced in our budget, and we do have a AAA bond rating, so we can bond our bonds at a much lower interest rate than most states can.
Now, you mentioned education and higher education. We're, of course, recording at Missouri Southern, and there's been a lot of talk this summer about how the state supported Missouri Southern this year, not only with the general allocation, but special projects, special funding. And
absolutely. You know, Missouri Southern is in my district, so I'm very proud of this institution. And if you look at the graduates, we have so many graduates go on to do great things. One of the things that we wanted to do this year is do some bonding, some state bonding, to allow some of our existing buildings to be remodeled and renovated. Reynolds Hall is going to be one of those that we're going to do some great remodeling, something that's needed to be done for a long time. You know, when we went through those labs and you saw all the rust on everything.
And the age of the building.
The age of the building. We're like, you know, it's about time that we make a change. So we got quite a bit of money allocated for that. So we're going to get the Reynolds Hall renovated. And then also the new dental school that Missouri Southern is going to be starting here very soon, at least getting all the building and architects, etc. Because you look at what Southwest Missouri can do, whether it's the dental school in Missouri Southern, the labs here at Reynolds Hall, and then also the medical school that KCU is doing in Joplin, which is going to be 600 students in 4 years. That's huge to our community. And the partnership between Missouri Southern and KCU is fantastic. So I can see Southwest Missouri, especially the Joplin area, just taking off when it comes to biosciences and medical schools, etc. So I'm really proud that we got that money allocated to Missouri Southern, and we're going to see Missouri Southern continue to grow. So
for John Q. Public, it's more than programs for Missouri Southern. Do you say that there'll be splinter businesses, side businesses that'll come support these institutions?
Absolutely. Think of the enrollment for Missouri Southern now is up this year. We have one of our institutions in Missouri that has seen a sharp decline in student enrollment to the tune of possibly 6%. But we've seen student growth, which is great, because that means Missouri Southern is doing something right. But also look at the 600 students that are going to be at the medical school. They're going to need housing. They're going to need good insurance. They're going to need to buy food. They're going to need to buy a lot of things that a family has to have in order to survive. And if you look at a lot of the families, a lot of the people that are actually signing up for the medical school is not your traditional 18-year-old student. Some of them are already married couples, husband and wife that have kids. So it's not just going to be dorm room facilities that we're going to need. We're going to need apartments and homes, etc. So it's going to be big for our community, not just for our colleges and our universities in Southwest Missouri. It's going to be good for our businesses and our landlords all across the Southwest Missouri.
Of course, the dental school is actually a program with the University of Missouri Kansas City, having facilities here on Missouri Southern's campus.
Absolutely, and that's awesome. You know, with our hygiene school, and now we have the dental school. It's going to be something that is big for our community.
Do you foresee more of that perhaps in higher education, of institutions working together on projects?
Absolutely. I think the vast majority of the universities throughout the state realize that it has to be partnership. It has to be a teamwork. You know, there's been rivalries for years. You know, I spent time in the Navy, and there's always a little bit of rivalry, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines. But we all understand at the end of the day, it's teamwork. It's about winning. And it's the same thing with higher ed. I believe that a lot of the institutions now realize that for one to be successful and the others to fail is not good for our state. So the teamwork that we're starting to see with Missouri Southern and Crowder, Missouri Southern and University of Missouri, and Missouri Southern and KCU, you know, I think everybody has realized that as a team, we're much more successful than as individual institutions. And I think that is what we're going to see in the future is teamwork between all of our universities.
And of course, the funding for the universities, I believe the legislature also looked at university operations, the outcomes. You know, you want successful graduates.
Sure,
and you're asking for some paths to be established for those.
We want some performance-based funding where if a university is doing a great job educating the kids and they get in good paying jobs, then why not reward those institutions? Then if somebody is failing, and they're not educating the students the way that they should, then maybe we need to make a change in their leadership, et cetera, and find a way that they need to turn around and do a good job at educating their kids.
Right. Well, looking at the past session for the viewers, you know, you mentioned your local representation, but you also have specific committees that you serve on, and specific bills represent. What do you see as far as your accomplishments coming out of that session?
One of the things that I'm proudest about is, of course, you know, I chair the Veterans Committee. I'm a veteran, and I'm proud of Missouri Southern that they have the Ghost Star programs. We have a lot of kids that are going to be in the Missouri National Guard that come here, as well as a lot of veterans that separate from the military that are getting their education in Missouri Southern. But two of the things that we worked on this year that we got passed is one, if you're in the military, then your state payroll is tax-free. When you're deployed, it was always tax-free. But when they came home, then they were taxed. So one of the things we wanted to do is, since the military pay is not keeping up with the cost of inflation, that's a federal issue, so we can't do anything about that.
Can't change the pay, right?
We can't change their pay. But what we can do is we can help augment that by giving them a tax break. And that tax break means that they don't have to pay state income tax if you're an active duty military personnel. But the second thing that I'm really proud of is the education acts that we did for our military personnel. We made sure that anybody who joins the Missouri National Guard or the military, the reserves, can immediately get in-state tuition in the state of Missouri. So if somebody is a Illinois resident, wants to move to Missouri and go to Missouri Southern, they can immediately get in-state tuition if they join the Missouri National Guard.
As a Guard member?
As a Guard member, correct. Before, you'd have to wait 1 year. You'd have to establish the residency in the state.
Eligibility and so forth.
So, but in order to get them to come to Missouri, let's waive the residency requirement. And then the biggest piece is the Education Act that allows post 9/11 veterans to get $50 per credit hour for undergraduate studies. And that is huge. If I served 20 years in the Navy and separated from the Navy and decided, well, do I want to move to Illinois, to Texas, to Florida, or Missouri? Well, if I can come to Missouri and get $50 per credit hour and become a citizen of the state of Missouri, why not get those veterans to come here? Because we know veterans make good neighbors, they make good employers, they make good employees, they make good students. They're used to getting up on time all day, every day, so they have a tendency of being on time to class. So let them come to our universities, and if I can get a 10% increase in the number of military veterans that are enrolled in the University of Missouri, Missouri Southern, or any one of
Any
our
school in the state, any public institution, right.
whether it's a 2-year or 4-year institution, why not let them come back here? And $50 per credit hour would be a good incentive for them to move to Missouri and establish their roots back here and make this their home.
Encouraging them to pursue higher education as well.
Absolutely.
And tying that together.
Absolutely.
Of course, we're in election year. A few months down the road, we have the big November elections. After you get through the veto session, is it everybody going to turn to what's happening in November?
Oh, absolutely. Because after May, when session is over, everybody is gearing up to the August election. So all those members that had challengers during the August election, the primaries, it was campaign from May to August. And then now from August, now that the primary is over, veto session is coming up on September 14th. After that, everybody's going to have to gear up towards the November election. Even though it seems like it's a long way away, a few breaths and it'll be here. So everybody will be gearing up for that.
And not only the November election, they turn the corner after November, a quick turnaround to go back in January.
Yep, come January, we're going to have a new governor, we're going to have a new lieutenant governor, we're going to have a new secretary of state, we're going to have a new treasurer. It doesn't matter if the Republican or Democrat wins, they're going to be all new. So we are going to have a lot of new faces in Jefferson City. So we're going to have a lot of freshmen. And we know how college and high school is. Freshmen, usually it takes a while for them to gear up and get rolling with the way that things happen. So it's going to take a little bit of time in January for everybody to get acclimated to the culture in Jefferson City. But I think we're going to have some great people to get elected. I have confidence in the Missouri voters. And I believe that they're going to choose wisely, and regardless of who gets elected, Missouri will continue to be a good state.
And work together on those items. And
absolutely.
Term limit effects on the legislature this year. Is this a big year for turnover?
Nope, this is actually one of the smallest years. Okay. I think we've had less than 10 people or so actually term limited this year. It's 2018 is where it's big, and that's my class. We had about 57 people elected in 2010, my first year in the House. So we're going to have a huge turnover in 2018. I'm proud that I have the opportunity to run for the Senate in 2018. So I'm going to have somebody take my place. Representative White, Rybolt, Lant, Kelly are all going to be freshmen. So we're going to see a lot of activity on the ballot in 2018.
So but you feel the carryover from the legislative side, you'll have some stability going into January.
Oh, absolutely. I think we'll be fine. My goal is when I'm done in the House, whoever's going to take my place, to make sure that I don't have to train them, but I do have to get them acclimated to Jefferson City. I need to educate them about what should the priorities be of Southwest Missouri. We represent about 37,000 people. Fortunately, the 37,000 people that I represent, the vast majority, 90% of the people support me wholeheartedly. And even the other 10% support me most of the time, but I do try to listen to my constituents. I had a conversation with a couple just the other day that were totally opposite sides of the spectrum, but they came up to me and thanked me because I'm the only one that ever emails back opinions. I respond to their emails or their contact information that they send me, and that's my job. My title right now is to be a representative. How can I be a representative if I don't know what the hearts of the people are? So even though we may be on opposite sides, they were very thankful that I spent time to communicate with them. Now, I don't give long dissertations when I email back. It's usually just a small paragraph.
Response to everybody.
And number one, that shows that I am the one that's actually responding to the emails. I'm the secretary to do that. That's my job. And they understand that, number one, I'm doing it. Number two, I just want to be concise. I don't want to feed them a line of bull and try to mask my opinion on something. And so I try to be very concise and complete in a single paragraph.
Well, I'd like to thank you very much for visiting with us today and sharing some information with the audience, and look forward to following up as we perhaps head into the next legislative session.
Absolutely. I'm excited about the November election, and I don't care where people stand politically, but this is one of the things that our Constitution guarantees us the right to do, to vote. And I encourage everybody to go out and vote in November, because it's a great privilege that we have in our country to go out and elect our leaders.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. And I'd like to thank you for joining us this week on Newsmakers. I'm Judy Stiles. I'll see you again next week at the same time on this station.